So you think you can just waltz in here and tell me how to do my job?
Chapter 1. The Arrest That Should Never Have Happened. The town of Brookfield, Ohio was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. Neighbors waved across lawns, families filled pews on Sundays, and gossip flowed through the diner like coffee. But one summer morning, everything changed. Thomas Miller, a soft-spoken high school teacher, was drinking his usual black coffee on the porch when police cruisers screeched into his driveway. Officers stormed up the steps, shouting his name. "Thomas Miller, you're under arrest for fraud, obstruction, and witness tampering." The mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the wood. His wife, Linda, ran out barefoot, her robe flapping in the warm breeze. "What is happening?" "He hasn't done anything," she screamed. But the cuffs clicked around Thomas's wrists before he could get a word out. Neighbors gathered on lawns whispering. Students passing by on their bikes froze at the sight of their teacher being shoved into the back of a cruiser. Thomas looked out the window of the squad car, his heart racing. This has to be a mistake. I've done nothing wrong. But as the cruiser pulled away, he caught a glimpse of the judge waiting outside the courthouse, Judge Alan Crawford. The smirk on Crawford's face told Thomas one chilling truth. This wasn't about law. This was personal. Chapter 2. The judge's grudge, Judge Alan Crawford, had ruled Brookfield's courthouse for nearly 3 decades. To the outside world, he was a figure of authority, a man with a deep voice and a gavel that commanded silence. But to those who worked behind closed doors, he was something else entirely, arrogant, vindictive, and untouchable. Years earlier, Thomas had testified in a minor civil dispute involving Crawford's brother-in-law. Thomas, as a witness, simply told the truth, but the truth had embarrassed Crawford's family. From that moment, the judge carried a private vendetta, and now, years later, with a web of influence at his fingertips, Crawford saw his chance to strike. The charges against Thomas were flimsy at best. A local contractor accused him of falsifying documents, an accusation without evidence. But Crawford made sure the case reached his bench, bypassing normal assignments. He leaned on the prosecutor. He whispered to detectives. He even hinted to the press. By the time Thomas stood in court, his reputation was already shredded in the community. Parents whispered about him at PTA meetings. Students avoided him in the grocery store. Linda sat in the gallery, holding her hands tight in prayer, whispering, "Please, God, let them see the truth." But truth was the last thing Crawford wanted. Chapter 3. The Trial of Lies. The courthouse buzzed with reporters. A teacher accused of fraud was headline gold. Thomas sat at the defense table in a cheap suit, his hair neatly combed, his face pale. His lawyer, David Monroe, was outmatched from the start. Every motion he filed was denied. Every objection was silenced with a sharp gavel strike. The prosecutor strutted like a man who already had his win. He presented evidence that was later revealed to be circumstantial at best. Altered documents, coerced witness statements, vague timelines. When Linda testified, her voice trembling as she swore Thomas had been home the night in question, Crawford leaned forward and cut her off. "Mrs. Miller, you are his wife. Your testimony is biased. Answer only what's asked." Her eyes filled with tears, but she obeyed. When Thomas took the stand, his voice shook. "I've dedicated my life to teaching. I would never falsify records. I've never cheated anyone. This is a mistake," the prosecutor smirked. "Or a lie." "Objection," his attorney shouted. "Sustained," Crawford said, but his tone dripped with sarcasm, as if mocking the very idea that Thomas might be innocent. The jury shifted uncomfortably, and when the verdict came, it was no surprise. "Guilty on all counts," Linda sobbed into her hands. Thomas stared in disbelief, the words slamming into him like a hammer. Crawford's lips twitched into the faintest smile. Chapter 4. Life stolen prison swallowed Thomas whole. His quiet demeanor made him a target. Guards treated him like dirt. Inmates mocked him as the teacher fraud. Nights were the worst. The clang of steel doors, the screams from down the hall, the crushing thought that his life had been stolen not by accident, but by design. Back home, Linda worked 2 jobs to keep the house. She stood outside the courthouse with a sign that read, "My husband is innocent." Most people ignored her. Some even jeered. But one day a young journalist named Megan Clark stopped, notepad in hand. "Tell me everything," she said. And that was the moment the tide began to shift. Chapter 5. The journalist's discovery, Megan Clark, wasn't like the other reporters who circled Brookfield. Fresh out of grad school, she carried both a camera bag and a fire in her chest. She'd grown up hearing her grandfather talk about how the justice system once ruined an innocent man in their family. So when she saw Linda Miller standing alone in the cold with her cardboard sign, something stirred inside her. Linda's voice trembled as she told Megan about the trial, the suppressed witnesses, and the smug smile of Judge Crawford. Megan's pen moved quickly, but her eyes never left Linda's face. "Do you have the court transcripts?" Megan asked. Linda nodded. "Every page. I keep them in a box at home. They're all I have left to prove the truth." That night, Megan spread the files across her kitchen table. She read until her eyes blurred. Then just past midnight she found it, a forensic analyst's original statement. Documents appear altered. Cannot confirm defendant's involvement. But in the official transcript, that line was missing. Replaced with, documents confirmed altered by Miller. Megan's hands shook. Someone had rewritten the evidence. Chapter 5. The journalist's discovery, Megan Clark, wasn't like the other reporters who circled Brookfield. Fresh out of grad school, she carried both a camera bag and a fire in her chest. She'd grown up hearing her grandfather talk about how the justice system once ruined an innocent man in their family. So when she saw Linda Miller standing alone in the cold with her cardboard sign, something stirred inside her. Linda's voice trembled as she told Megan about the trial, the suppressed witnesses, and the smug smile of Judge Crawford. Megan's pen moved quickly, but her eyes never left Linda's face. "Do you have the court transcripts?" Megan asked. Linda nodded. "Every page. I keep them in a box at home. They're all I have left to prove the truth." That night, Megan spread the files across her kitchen table. She read until her eyes blurred. Then just past midnight, she found it. A forensic analyst's original statement. Documents appear altered. Cannot confirm defendant's involvement. But in the official transcript, that line was missing. Replaced with, documents confirmed altered by Miller. Megan's hands shook. Someone had rewritten the evidence. Chapter 6. Cracks in the Foundation. The next morning, Megan published her first article. Evidence missing in Miller trial raises questions about Judge Crawford. It didn't make the front page. Yet. But it lit a spark. Calls poured into the newsroom from former defendants who claimed Crawford had silenced them too. A retired clerk wrote anonymously, warning, "Check the files. He changes what he doesn't like." By the weekend, the whispers had grown louder. Local radio hosts debated it. Neighbors who once avoided Linda now leaned in, whispering, "Maybe you were right." Crawford, reading the paper at his mahogany desk, slammed it down so hard his bourbon glass rattled. "Find out who's feeding her," he growled to his clerk, and shut it down. But the harder he pushed, the more the truth leaked. Chapter 7. A wife's defiance, snow fell in thick sheets across Brookfield, but Linda stood her ground on the courthouse steps. This time she wasn't alone. Her sign, "Free Thomas Miller," and was joined by others. Neighbors, church friends, even former students of Thomas began to gather. Some carried candles. Others held handmade posters that read, "Justice for Miller." Megan filmed it all, posting clips online. One video of Linda speaking through tears went viral. "My husband is innocent. Judge Crawford stole his freedom because he could. But the truth doesn't belong to him. It belongs to all of us." Within days, the protest grew. Trucks honked in support. Strangers sent donations. What started as one woman's lonely fight was becoming a movement. Inside the prison visiting room, Thomas pressed his hand against the glass, tears in his eyes as Linda told him. "They're listening now," she whispered. "We're not alone anymore." Thomas smiled for the first time in months. "Then maybe I'll come home." Chapter 8. The Judge Unravels. Judge Alan Crawford sat in chambers, the walls closing in. Reporters camped outside his home. His phone buzzed nonstop. Prosecutors, politicians, even old allies begging him to resign before the storm swallowed him whole. But Crawford wasn't the resigning type. He puffed his cigar, eyes blazing. "I built this bench. I decide who's guilty." Yet in his drawer sat the very documents Megan had exposed, the originals he thought he'd buried. Every time he looked at them, sweat prickled his skin. Meanwhile, Megan prepared her next article with evidence from the clerk, Files altered in at least 3 other trials. Witness statements cut. Crawford's handwritten notes in the margins. Remove this. Too weak. Focus jury here. When the article dropped, the headline exploded across social media. Judge Crawford accused of systemic evidence tampering. National outlets picked it up. Protesters outside Brookfield's courthouse doubled overnight. Crawford tried to walk into court one morning, but the chants drowned him out. Resign! 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 His face turned red. He banged his gavel harder in hearings, snapped at attorneys, and barked at clerks. But the cracks showed. The man who once ruled with smug confidence was unraveling in front of the very town he thought he controlled. And in a cell just miles away, Thomas Miller whispered a prayer. Let this be the beginning of the end. Chapter 9. The retrial. The courthouse in Brookfield looked different now. Where once it had been a symbol of Judge Crawford's power, it was now surrounded by protesters, reporters, and flashing cameras. The chants of "Justice for Miller" rolled like thunder through the square. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. For the first time in 2 years, Thomas Miller walked into the courtroom not as a convict in chains, but as a man fighting for his freedom. He wore a plain grey suit borrowed from a church friend. His hair had thinned, his face lined with worry, but his eyes held a spark of hope. At the bench sat Judge Eleanor Hayes, a woman with a reputation for fairness and a backbone of steel. She raised her gavel and said firmly, "This courtroom is not a circus, but make no mistake, today is about truth." The prosecutor shuffled nervously through his files. He no longer had the smug confidence of a man backed by Crawford's shadow. Too many eyes were on him now. And then the defense began. Rachel Whitman, a sharp defense attorney who had volunteered to take Thomas's case after reading Megan's articles, rose with the documents in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, her voice steady and strong, "this is not just about Thomas Miller. This is about whether justice belongs to one man in a black robe or to the people." She held up the original forensic report. "This report says the documents were inconclusive. That is the truth. Yet the version shown to the jury in the first trial claimed Thomas altered them. Who changed it? Not the analyst, not the defense. The change came from the judge's chambers." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Cameras clicked. One by one, witnesses took the stand. The forensic analyst, swearing the report had been altered without his consent. A former clerk, testifying that Crawford ordered her to remove testimony he didn't like. Even a retired bailiff, admitting Crawford bragged that he could make any jury believe anything. By the time Rachel finished, the courtroom was buzzing. "This man," she said, pointing to Thomas, "lost 2 years of his life because one judge cared more about revenge than truth. Today, you have the power to correct that injustice." The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice rang out, "We find the defendant, Thomas Miller, not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Linda collapsed into tears, clutching Thomas as he wrapped his arms around her. Strangers in the gallery cheered. Reporters rushed for the doors. And outside, the crowd's chant grew louder than ever. "Justice for Miller! Justice for Miller!" Chapter 10. The Judge's Fall While. Thomas walked free. Alan Crawford's world collapsed. The Attorney General launched a sweeping investigation. Dozens of past cases were reopened. Former defendants came forward, telling stories of silenced witnesses, missing evidence, and Crawford's arrogance. 1 week later, Crawford himself sat at the defendant's table, stripped of his robe, his hands folded tightly as if trying to hold his world together. The prosecutor's words cut like a knife. For years, Alan Crawford abused his power. He altered evidence, buried testimony, and destroyed lives. He believed his bench made him untouchable. Today, we prove no man is above the law. Witness after witness sealed his fate. Megan's articles were entered into the record, clerks testified. Analysts confirmed reports had been changed under his orders. The jury didn't take long. Guilty, on all counts. The same courthouse where he once reigned now watched him led away in handcuffs. Protesters outside erupted with cheers as the once powerful judge disappeared behind prison gates. Justice had finally struck back. Epilogue, the light. After darkness, spring came to Brookfield with a warmth Thomas hadn't felt in years. He sat on his porch, sunlight spilling across the lawn, Linda by his side. For the first time in a long time, the world felt real, not a nightmare. Students he once taught began visiting, some hugging him, some apologizing for doubting him. The town slowly shifted, shame giving way to respect. Megan's reporting won national recognition, but when asked, she always said the same thing. This isn't my story. It's the Millers' story, and every family's story who's ever been silenced. Judge Crawford lived out his final years behind bars, his name a stain on the history of Brookfield. He died alone, remembered not as a man of law, but as a warning of what happens when power corrupts. And Thomas? He rebuilt, slowly, carefully. Nights still carried shadows, but each morning began with Linda's smile and the laughter of neighbors who now waved with respect instead of suspicion. One evening, as the sun dipped low and fireflies lit the yard, Thomas whispered to Linda, "We made it." She squeezed his hand. "No, Thomas. We fought for it." And together they sat in the glow of hard-won freedom, proof that truth can be buried, twisted, delayed. But in the end, justice always finds its way back to the light. If you believe no one is above the gap, smash that like button. Subscribe for more true crime and justice stories where the truth always finds the light. What would you do if this happened to your family? Comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. Share this video with someone who still believes in justice. Together, we keep the fight alive.